Hi everyone, it's Margaret here.
And Adam, welcome to the Tree Planners podcast. So this month we are talking about activism. What got us doing what we're doing now, which I guess you would call activism. Most people will call advocacy. Yeah. And some different ideas, some different ways of thinking about what activism is. Because you and I, while we've been talking about this a little bit, have kind of arrived at this notion that a lot of people are activists even though they don't really believe they're activists.
Yeah, it all depends on how you define it, right? So you could be an advocate in your child's school. Maybe you're trying to get them better services. Maybe you're trying to bring healthier lunch. Maybe you're at your workplace advocating for, a new break room, or I don't know, right? And so there's this idea that if you're not protesting, then you're not an activist. And I think we're trying to remove that barrier, because I feel, and I think you agree, that if people actually loosen that terminology of what being an activist is and recognizing it's advocating for something you really care about in a place that you care about, your church, your community, your home, your workplace, your school, whatever, that more people would be inclined to take action on other things too, right? So I think the origin stories are really important, because it's important to recognize for people that haven't got into advocacy before, or don't recognize themselves as advocates or activists, to see how other people have transcended that role and maybe find some similarities in their thinking, right? So that's why I asked you, how did you start? And then we were talking about how did I start, or what was that origin for us?
And we get into that in a little bit. But also with the origin story, we talk about children getting involved in activism, which we see a lot now with Fridays for Future.
Yeah.
Which has taken off globally at this point. And we also speak with 3 people in the area who are activists in different ways, and they all sort of came to it for different reasons.
Right. And different political affiliations, and some are totally apolitical. And I think it's interesting when you're saying about the youth. I mean, Dave Meslin's book, Tear Down, which we both really enjoyed, was going on about how you practice your democratic muscles, right? And how you start by getting involved in some small way. And that those become the things that you need as you get on to further challenges, or the world gets more challenging. And so I think about our origin story, and then I think about my son, who will probably not have very much time when he was like, oh, I was doing something from when I was little, right? It seems like the youth culture now, especially with the climate, is very much, they're not afraid of taking on that challenge, and not afraid of, there's this ownership, which is advocacy, which is activism, but I don't even think they recognize that that's what it is. It's just their way of being now, right?
And to your point, one of the things that Dave talks about in his book a lot is breaking down barriers to participation. Activism isn't necessarily sort of a subset of people who are distinct and kind of over there, but rather there's perhaps to varying degrees, but activism is probably something that just about everybody engages in. So, speaking of origin stories, what is yours?
Oh, we have to do that, do we?
Yeah.
So my origin story was, I've always been a bit of a pain in the butt. I've always been kind of outspoken, and, always willing to push kind of the boundaries of, is this okay? Is that acceptable? So before I even got into advocacy within my workplace, pushing for people that, were getting picked on by management, or unsafe work practices, or that sort of thing. That was always kind of my thing. Or when I was working in the public system, kids that were relegated to not getting support, I was the one to go to the principal. I was the one that was fighting at the school board for them. So there was always a sense of pushing against kind of that status quo. And then there was a development application that was coming close to home. I was off work at the time with my youngest, and I just felt like I needed to do something. So I had this weird dream about my son and I walking by, I think we were driving by actually in the dream, driving by these fields, which are currently right now farm fields. And then, the next day we drive by and it's these ticky-tacky houses, and him saying to me like, "Mommy, what happened here?" And then I said, "Well, I don't know. I have no idea what happened." So I just couldn't let that stand. And then that's kind of what started. So I got involved with the Ratepayers Association locally and worked really tirelessly with them for a long time and met really good people. And that's, so there for me, there's an actual time when I feel like I went from advocating in a place that I was meant to be, if you will, my workplace, home life, to advocating in a place where people didn't want you necessarily advocating. I think there's a switch for me there now that I'm thinking about it.
Right.
It's that it doesn't feel like you're supposed to be advocating with your government. It doesn't feel like you're supposed to be advocating with your municipal council. Like they don't really want you to, is the sense that I had always. And that they know better and they've asked these questions. So your help isn't needed. And so I think that's when I made the switch. When I think about the origin story, even though I've always had some tendencies to be a bit of a pain, I advocated in a place where no one invited me, right? I invited myself into that space.
Interesting.
And you?
Well, so you've asked me this before and I've had a hard time answering it. Couldn't really put my finger on any one thing, but I come back to how I grew up, which was a little bit of a unique situation. I grew up in an intentional community. It's called Camp Hill. So in these communities, there are usually multiple houses, and the way that they used to work is they used to have families living in those houses, and those families used to life share with people with special needs. So I grew up with an extended family, including adults with autism and Down syndrome and various other special needs. And I don't know if this is precisely it, but I have this strong memories of being in public and being acutely aware of the disturbance, I guess, that's caused when people are outwardly very different. And I remember in myself this tension, sort of anxiety between sort of wanting to not be associated with that, but then also wanting to be associated with that, and also really just having to be associated with it. Whether, when I was a kid,
how old were you roughly?
Well, I grew up in it. I was 10 months old when my parents moved down to one in the States, and I grew up there. And then,
but do you have a timeline of like when you remember that kind of tension? Like, was it there from when you were like 4 or 5?
No, when I was that age, there wasn't. I actually didn't identify those differences.
Yeah.
As such, so I was a teenager, and I think that's probably sort of what would be expected of teenagers for the most part. So that tension between feeling sort of uncomfortable and wanting to make something comfortable, sort of wanting to make something right, I think is possibly part of my personality that drives some of my activism, certainly in the social justice arena.
What Dave talks about in his book, The Teardown, that we have this sense that activism and advocacy involves politics. And politics, unless you're a politician or you're paid by politicians or you work for the government, isn't your job. Right. That is not your job. That is not your place. You're not a professional. And so stay out of it. And how that's totally, I hope that's flipping on its ear, that the idea that democracy belongs to us. It's a byproduct of our actions, not something that's, outside of us, right? So that tension that you're experiencing is something that I've experienced, and I would think a lot of people experience, because they want to do something, but do you want to be one of, quote unquote, those people? Right. Do you know? Yeah. To go into a place where you don't belong. Cause a
disturbance, and upset the status quo, make things difficult.
And if people really do thrive in community, you are now going from a community that you feel like you belong in, your family, your church, your whatever, and moving into a community that hasn't welcomed you, right? And not knowing how that's a big jump for people. So if they recognize that, one, a lot of people have made that jump, and that two, that there's a community that's there as well, then that's great.
There's some interesting contrasts with, we mentioned a little earlier on we mentioned Fridays for Future and the children that are advocating for action on climate change. And there's interesting contrasts I was thinking about as you were speaking. I've been taking my kids down to Meridian Place on Fridays for the past, I think we're week 25 or so now.
Crazy.
We just go down for an hour.
Yep.
And sometimes it's just a handful of us, and sometimes there's
sometimes I make it down.
Sometimes Margaret's there, and but then sometimes some local schools come down, and there'll be several dozen kids, and it's a great atmosphere. And the kids, just thinking about this tension that we're talking about, it's like for the most part they don't have that yet. No. Maybe like they're just.
They haven't learned it yet.
No, and they're trying to get cars to honk and shouting these fantastic slogans. Yeah, I've got a little recording here of a recent one. We are unstoppable. Another world is possible. We are unstoppable. Another world is possible. We are unstoppable. And they are, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of just right there in the moment, kind of doing their thing.
And they're irreverent about it, right? They don't realize they're irreverent about it, but that's how adults look at them. And like a shout out to a mutual friend of ours, Julie Johnson, who runs an amazing program in Shanty Bay Public School. It's called Change Agents. And that is the type of programming coming from a teacher background, as also looking at now more of an advocacy-based thing. That is the kind of program where you get kids to do things about stuff that they care about and build like an independent project that's, okay, there's problems in the world and it doesn't have to be environmental. She doesn't say you guys have to work on this and I care about this. Like they pick out of the UN global goals, but that is them building a community around advocacy. Whereas adults, we've been relegated to our homes, to our suburbs, to, I work on that shift and these are the people I know. I don't know these people. And so that's a big leap for us. But watching my own son, who is affiliated with the Change Agents in Shanty Bay, watching him build a community that's based around, hey, you've been problem solving too? Yeah, me too. This is cool. Like I have a connection with you that has nothing to do with our socioeconomic status, with our gender, with our hopes, our dreams, our educations. It's just mostly we share the idea that we can do something about it. And that's crazy. And that's what adults have to learn from the kids, is that once you get out, and when you listen to Hale, it was the community that he found by getting active that really propelled him into do more. And the same for me, and I'm sure the same for you, that as soon as you started to find some people, you're like, wow, these relationships are solid and they're built on common values, where you don't always have that, right? Just because you're on a baseball team with a bunch of people doesn't mean you actually would be friends if you weren't on the baseball team, right?
Yeah. That so makes sense. Speaking of Hale, do you want to set that up? And
his advocacy is focused more on political campaigning and political involvement, and he's is very involved in the local progressive conservative movement. So,
and he's young,
well spoken,
really keen to make a difference in his community.
Yeah, for sure.
So we went and we were chased up and down the street by mosquitoes as we talked. And it was really quite nice. So.
Yeah. So here's Hale.
But first, if you like what you hear and you want to support us, head on over to simcoecountygreenbelt.ca and click on Become a Supporter. By supporting us, not only are you helping us continue to make these podcasts, but you are helping us to continue to advocate for a healthy Simcoe County far into the future. A healthy Simcoe County is a Simcoe County that uses its abundant natural resources as a natural solution to climate change, a Simcoe County that values its farmland and agricultural sector, a Simcoe County that has clean and pristine water, as well as vibrant and abundant biodiversity in its forests and natural heritage areas. This also means that we develop our urban areas in a way that provides the highest quality of life possible, including opportunities for active transportation such as walking and bicycling, as well as efficient mass transportation and affordable housing. All of these issues will be covered on future podcasts in depth. So again, please support us by heading to simcoecountygreenbelt.ca and clicking on Become a Supporter.
All right, so my name's Hale Mahon. I'm the secretary of the Midhurst Community Recreation Association and the president of the Barrie Springwater or Medante PC Youth Association. The first time I kind of got involved, I've always been interested in politics from a young age, probably about 10 or 11. I was very interested in politics, but I was never really kind of actively engaged in politics until the summer of 2017 when I was at a fall fair and I met a local politician and we got talking. And so from there, that kind of stemmed my political engagement. I started attending different events and both political and community events from there. And so I kind of became like a leader, if you will, in the political and in the community.
Was it an issue? Or was it an issue that drove you to it? Or was it just the connection with people that you saw as an outlet? Like, what was the thing that said, okay, I actually want to make this more than just, hey, I went to a fall fair, met a guy, that was really cool. I mean, what was it that made you turn into, gee, I can do this. I can do stuff regardless of age, right?
Right, yeah. So it wasn't any really like specific issue, I don't think, but I kind of like started to get involved, and then just like talking to different people and like the sense of community that it built, I think that's why I stayed involved. And also like seeing the amount of change that you can have, like be it volunteering for a political party or like organizing a community event or anything like that. So like, the impact that it can have on your friends and neighbors, like if you spend months planning some type of an event and then like on the day of the event, you see all your friends and neighbors having a good time, then I think that's really what sells it for me. Mm-hmm. That and the community aspect of it. Like I've made some great new friends, like met some of the greatest people that you'll ever meet in the community and the political atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A little nerve-wracking planning those too. Right?
A little bit.
But to your point, when you start to connect with people around a community, around a thought, around a vision, the friendships and those connections are much more meaningful than maybe just a random, hey, I went to the gym and I met some other person and we seem to, hit it off. It's a little bit different, right? There's a bit of a deeper connection there.
Yeah, because you're like in politics and in community events and whatnot, I think the reason why it's a bit of a deeper connection, because you're working towards a common goal. Like say you're in a political party, you're working towards a common goal of getting some type of legislation passed, or you're working towards a common goal of planning some community event, or like, you're working towards a common goal. And I think that's the reason why the connections that you make and the friendships you make are so much deeper than, say, just a social thing.
Mm-hmm. Should we walk so we can sort of escape these mosquitoes?
Yeah, we're doing it outside. So this is like black fly season in Ontario.
I was thinking, coming up here, I've got something I'm sort of mulling in terms of, so every Friday I take my boys down to Meridian Place in Barrie, and we do a Fridays for Future. And there's some kids that come along. They're fantastic. They have signs, and they have the honk if you kind of sign, and they'll stand by the road, and they get lots of honks and stuff like that. And I'm a little bit jealous of them because I don't really have the guts to do that, at least comfortably. And I was thinking on the way up here that's, at least for me, and maybe not for you, but for me, that's kind of something with activism, which is like part of it is about making yourself, like exposing yourself to a level of discomfort.
Right.
Because I guess maybe the payoff at the end is something that you believe would be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, sometimes you kind of have to step out of your comfort zone and like put yourself out there and do some things that you're kind of that you're not necessarily comfortable with doing. Like I remember one time during those, there was a bunch of protests going on against the provincial education changes, and I was out there protesting in favor of the changes. And so it was like there was probably 50 people, with their signs and all that, and I was the only person out there. With my PC hat and PC T-shirt and all that, protesting in favor of the changes. And so, it was a bit scary. I'll say that for sure, because, well, I was vastly outnumbered.
Really, right?
Yeah,
by yourself.
That would be pretty, make you pretty vulnerable, right?
Yeah. So then the next day, actually, I was at a PC event, and all the people were walking over to me and shaking my hand and just basically talking about how good it was that I was kind of putting myself out there, voicing my opinions, really. And we may disagree on the political issues, but I think it's always important to voice your opinion and to not kind of step back from voicing your opinion just because other people might disagree with you. So that's a big thing.
So for anybody out there listening who is, all of a sudden thinking, hey, there's this that I am really concerned about and I want to do something, any sort of words of advice you might have to?
I would say think about the payoff. So if you really believe in some policy, or you really believe that some goal is the right way to go, then really it shouldn't be about whether or not you're too scared to go out there and do it. But yeah, so you should think about what kind of an impact you're going to have by doing this. And if the impact is great enough, then I think that kind of outweighs, or it should outweigh, if you feel scared about, or if you're stepping out of your comfort zone or something like that.
We live in my house. The rule is fear is never an excuse. right? You
Yeah,
can
it's
have
good.
fear. That's fine, but it's never an excuse not to do something, except if it's really stupid, like jumping off a bridge. That's totally okay. Fear's an excuse there. But unlike non-lethal things, it's okay to have fear. It's natural. But living behind that curtain will just insulate you from really finding things. Because we've known each other, Hale, for many years now. And full disclosure, he's one of my neighbors. And so I've seen, as you've kind of launched into this more active role, you have really filled yourself out in some ways, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
You seem much more secure in yourself and much more engaged, I would say, right?
I agree, yeah. So it kind of helped you find yourself, I think. But when you have a particular calling, when you really believe in something and you try and fight for that thing, it makes you more confident as a person, I think. So that's a good thing as well.
There's a saying that I'm going to paraphrase it pretty poorly probably, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had this saying I saw about the fear of public speaking. And a mentor of hers a while ago, I guess, sort of told her that the fear isn't necessarily telling you, sort of what you guys were saying, the fear isn't necessarily telling you to run away. It's also sort of telling you that it's something important that you should pay attention to, I guess, know? Yeah. I'm sure I'm paraphrasing that pretty badly. And maybe we're just going to edit all of that out because of the car.
Some guy really jamming the tunes there.
Good beats.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks for doing this.
So for Hale, it's very clear that the community aspect of it, feeling like he sort of has found a home, is a really key thing for his participation. There was also, he talked about that level of discomfort that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And, feeling like something wasn't quite right and wanting to sort of then put the effort and energy into making things right.
Mm-hmm.
So working toward that notion of a better world.
And getting past that discomfort, right? I think if you're coming into advocacy for the first time or starting to identify yourself as an advocate, maybe you have been for ages and you're like, oh my gosh, that is what I do. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody's going to say, oh, it was really easy for me. I didn't have any, self-doubt. I didn't have any fear. I just kind of, that doesn't happen. Everybody goes through those things, right? Mm-hmm. So if people are expecting this to be all wonderful and easy, it's not. And that's why we're trying to talk about these stories, because seeing yourself in someone else's story is really important. So how do you push through it, right? And Keenan has some interesting takes on how he's pushed through that and how, you want to introduce Keenan now?
Well, Keenan Aylwin, so he's the next person that we speak to in a fairly noisy cafe. Beg your pardon for that.
My name's Keenan Aylwin. I'm the Ward 2 City Councillor for Barrie. So the first thing that comes to mind was back when I was in grade 3, maybe grade 2 even, at the school that I went to at the time, Portage Tree Public School. The principal decided to divide up the school grounds during recess by primary, junior, and intermediate. And I had friends. I was in primary, and I had friends at the junior section, and I wanted to play with them at recess. So I thought it was unjust that they would do that. So my sister and I actually started a petition with the help of our parents. Yeah, we're good. Thank you. So my sister and I started a petition with the help of our parents, and we went around, collected signatures, and presented it to the principal, and they didn't do anything about it. And then so I continued to break the rules and go and play in the junior or the intermediate section of the playground, and I got in trouble for it. Went and got sent to the principal's office and got detention, and I was furious about it because I felt it was so unjust that we couldn't just play together in the schoolyard. That was ridiculous. So that's probably the earliest memory of any sort of activism I can think of. Something small, but I think the fact that my parents encouraged us to do that and start a petition has definitely shaped the kind of activist I am today.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about how to think about that term, activism. I mean, there you saw something that you believe was wrong, and I guess identify with the help of your parents a few sort of things that you could do to try to make it right. It impacted you personally because you had friends. What does, when somebody calls you an activist or says the term activism to describe others, what does that make you think of?
It makes me think of like the feeling in your gut that something is just not right, that doesn't jive with your values and the way you think the world should be, and just the actions you take to change that and to make the world more just and fit your values and be the way you think it should be for everyone. I think my activism, like later in my life, when I was away at university, I was suffering from depression, pretty intense depression. That was pretty intimately connected to my feelings about the way the world works, the uncertain future of the world because of climate change, and that feeling of hopelessness and powerlessness that comes along with those things. And so I found that being involved in activism, being involved in efforts to change the way the world works has been incredibly healing, and like it's almost a survival tactic that if I wasn't doing this work, I would just be back where I was before, which is helpless, depressed, holed up in my apartment, not doing a whole lot, and just avoiding the world. So it's what keeps me going in a lot of ways.
Gives you hope.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
Yeah. And I'm a pretty cynical person.
No.
But
no way.
Pretty cynical person.
It doesn't come across, actually, though. I'm saying it's sort of kidding, but it really doesn't come across.
That's good. Because I try really hard to remain hopeful despite all the shitty things that are happening in the world and how we're running out of time. But I mean, what other choice do we have but to hold on to that hope?
Yeah. So for someone listening who doesn't consider themselves to be an activist, I think most people probably are, even if they often are doing stuff that's trying to make the world a better place, however that might align with your values and vision of what that is. But to someone listening who hears the term activist and that's a bit of a foreign thing, or they sort of shy away from that, or they're wondering, how can I become an activist, I guess. What would you say to somebody?
I think we put up like a lot of artificial fake barriers to getting involved in things like activism and politics. I hear people say all the time, like, you're so involved in politics. I know nothing about politics. I just don't understand it. Like, I don't know how you keep up. I don't know how you follow it. But what I say to that is politics is like just our everyday lives. Everything we do and touch that is formed and shaped by politics. So if you're a human being breathing the air, walking down the street, you have a job, you access healthcare, like you're just a person living in our society, in our world, you understand politics, because that's what politics is. You understand activism, because it's about our everyday lives and changing how our everyday lives work. So I think we need to be, as people who call ourselves activists, we need to be conscious of that, I think, and like make sure that it's accessible to everyone, and that we aren't making it an exclusive sort of group, and empowering people by helping them to realize that they're experts, that if you're living in this world, you're an expert, and that their perspective is valuable, and they have something to contribute.
So that was Keenan.
I think the one thing that was interesting with Keenan, and I've had this discussion with him before and others, was about when people respond with, I'm not into politics. And I can appreciate why people are into politics, because politics right now, level of discourse is terrible. It is a lot about staging, a lot about beating chests, a lot about, just politicking for the sake of politicking, right? Forgetting about the policies. And I wonder if democracy and politics are now diverging, right? Where you've got a political world, which is really not, yes, policies get made. Yes, people are experts within it. But the brand that most people see isn't about a common good. It's not about a greater good. It's really about ideologies. And if you had people that said, I'm not an expert in politics, I don't necessarily blame them, but I would at least like them to be able to say, I'm an expert in democracy, right? And so those are two totally different things. What if people said, you know what, I'm not into politics, but I'm into democracy. And so therefore I know how to reach my MPP. I know where my municipal council meetings are and when they're held. I know how to request a meeting with X. I know some basic things. I don't really care in the end if they are a card-carrying member of any party. And I don't care if they support politician A or politician B, but I would really like them to at least be experts in democracy. And I think that's where advocates and community organizers should really push back on. Stop focusing on trying to get them into politics and start focusing on trying to get them into democracy. Because how terrible would that be? How many people do you think would be willing to say, like, do you know much about democracy? And they'd be like, yeah, I know nothing about democracy. I think most people would actually find that embarrassing to say, right? It's kind of okay with politics because politics is just a cesspool in a lot of ways, right? But I would like it to get to the point where people are like, oh, I could never say that I'm not an expert in democracy. That's like actually shameful. That's where I would like it to be. So I'm okay with that divergence. But I'd like to have community organizers focusing more on that engagement in democracy, right?
Speaking of community organizers, next up Next up is Claire Malcolmson.
My name's Claire Malcolmson, and I'm the executive director of the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition. I think most of my activism has been focused on Lake Simcoe, and I've been at it for about 18 years now. But I appreciated having the question, what does activism mean to you and where does it come from in your life, asked because it helped me reflect on where it came from. So in terms of my family history and that influence, I've grown up with a lot of people who were doing what they could in the public interest. I wouldn't have called them activists, but, my granddad became a judge, a Supreme Court of Ontario judge, but he started off with David Lewis setting up the first labor union law practice in Canada. And it was really important. He came from a family with a lot of money, and he didn't have to do that. He could have gone on and been an industrialist like everyone else, but he chose to work in a field to help give people at the lower end of the pay scale the kinds of rights that he thought they were due. So that had a big influence on me and the rest of my family. And other folks in my family are, work for Children's Aid and in legal services and in, public mental health and teachers. So I've been surrounded by people who've been trying to do good for my whole life. And that's a huge influence. I think being an activist is a little bit of a departure from that. And I am an activist. I was in my son's school character assembly this morning, and it was about responsibility. And one of the quotes was, take a stand, take risks, take responsibility. And actually, I think that's what I'm doing as an activist. You have to be brave. You have to decide when there's a moment where you think, this is not okay. I am going to take a stand, and I'm going to see who else can join me in taking a stand, or I'm going to find out who else is taking the same kind of stand and join them. And then we take risks, right? It's not as a professional activist, and I've been working, being paid to do this work for quite a while. The money is not great. The reliability is not there. You don't have benefits, all that kind of stuff. So it has to come from somewhere deeper. And I think that actually really is about a sense of responsibility. I do feel, as I've been sort of taught by my family, that those of us who can need to stand up for the public interest, and we need to do what's best for those without a voice or without power to stand up for themselves. So that could be underprivileged people or people with mental health problems. In my case, I really identified with Lake Simcoe, and with the right of the environment, of the earth, of ecology, of a place, of a watershed to exist and to be healthy, free from really damaging interference. I think that also being an activist involves presenting an alternative vision for how we want our world to be, that originates outside of the corridors of power. I've done a lot of work at Queen's Park, and those corridors of power are filled with lots of people, and many of them are there to try to influence decisions to seek profit for themselves or their companies or their shareholders. Often profit and sustainability can go hand in hand, but it doesn't always. And I think there isn't a profit motive behind protecting the environment. And so there are fewer people who are able to step into that space, I think, and right. stand up for the environment. And I think those of us who can do that and want to do that need to do that, need to articulate the vision that we have for the future and make sure that we are representing ourselves in those corridors of power.
Mm-hmm. So to someone, one of the things that we talked about was the fact that there's probably a lot of people who wouldn't call themselves activists, but there are sort of, to varying degrees, everybody kind of takes that step forward to affect change in their lives, in ways that matter to them, that are meaningful to them. But to someone who maybe is just now thinking about taking that maybe a little bit of a bigger step, what would you say about getting involved?
Well, it's incredibly rewarding. It's really fun to be on the team that is on the right side of history, right? You don't want to be on the wrong side of history. No one wants that. No one wants to look back on their career and say, I made boatloads of money, but I really screwed the planet in the process. Like, how could you be proud of that? So think about where you want to be in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. Do you want to look back on your life and say, I tried and I did what I can? I mean, it doesn't mean that's the only thing you do. It doesn't mean you don't act like a normal person and, take your kids to school and fill their lunch boxes. And you still live your life. But everybody has the choice, really, about what they can do and who they can get involved with. There's a lot of distractions in this world, a lot of stuff that doesn't matter. So filtering out that kind of clutter, I think, is really important, and making sure you have time for fun and the things that enrich your soul. But I would suggest that one of those things is being with people that are doing good work as well, that are trying to make a change, that are exercising their power, even though they may not have much money or influence. They're, out there trying to do the right thing. And I do think it's important to be strategic and to be smart. I think people get burnt out on activism because they're not strategic and smart and they're not winning. It's really good to win. I've been involved in a number of wins I'm really proud of. And largely that's because I was aligned with people who had experience and who knew what they were doing and were smart and wanted to sit down and figure it out and collaborate. That's a really important step because nobody wants to be pissing in the wind, right? You want to win.
Next month, we're going to be focusing on upstream, downstream activism. It sounds pretty boring, but it's actually pretty interesting. So, for instance, it is the distinction between addressing poverty by buying somebody a meal or maybe giving somebody a bit of money versus systemic issues that create poverty in the first place. In other words, it's sort of the distinction between giving somebody a fish and teaching somebody how to fish. Also, just wanted to address the fact that the length of these episodes is creeping up. We do really want to keep them a little bit shorter, closer to 20 minutes. We are going to try to do this, but that might involve either doing 2 episodes or we'll just have to really get heavy-handed with our editing. Anyways, onward and upward. See you next time.